Assalamu alaikum, dear students. Welcome to the fourth and second last lecture of consultancy project experiential learning. Well, now we can say that we have covered quite a bit of the topics in these few lectures. I apologize for being very speedy in the last lecture, but we have to cover quite some stuff so that we can go to conclude this course within these 5 lectures that we have. It is true that I'm giving you an overview of all the theories that we have. We do need those theories to use to understand the process of learning and then the process of experiential learning. But the most important thing is that the experience that you get from the field, that is basically experiential learning. And what this course would tell you is that the experience that you get, how that experience would be most useful for you, and how you get that, how would you learn. You should be considering all these theories, because none of them is completely obsolete except for the few technical side theories which we will be discussing today. But the theories, for example, behaviorism that we discussed in the second lecture, the cognitivism that we discussed in the third lecture, and the social learning theory are very important, and today's theory is also very important for you. So let me summarize the last lecture. We discussed cognitivism and social learning theory. Cognitism originated around in 1950s and 60s. It was actually a theory that came in opposition to behaviorism that existed before those times. Now, cognitivism considered that each individual has a set of knowledge and experiences, and he has cognitive abilities. He has intellectual capabilities. He can analyze and you can say adopt information himself or herself. So based on that, he is not just an empty vessel. He can analyze that. He is an active learner in that sense, you can say. He is not just a passive learner, he is also an active learner. So that became the concept of cognitivism. In cognitism, there was discovery-based learning was the most important aspect. Then meaningful verbal learning was the second, that one we discussed under the theory or the broad horizon of cognitivism. Discovery-based learning actually considered that you give information to the individuals, and those individuals would connect that information with existing symbols that they already have in mind, because cognitivism actually considers that connections, the symbols are already present, information is stored in terms of symbols, and those symbols are present on the clean slate already. Tabula rasa sort of thing, presented by John Locke, and then people make meaningful connections between those events. And in discovery learning specifically, it is focused that if the learner discovers the information himself or herself, that information would be there to stay. They would store it permanently, because that knowledge has been discovered by himself or herself. Learner actually does an effort. So it is about observation, it is about asking questions, it is about problem solving skills that an individual has, and those skills are polished by the societal tools. Societal tools, for example, the media, the television, the laptops, the computers, the printers, as well as the concept of a society, about a phenomena, the language that they use. All these tools actually amplify the capability of an individual to connect those symbols with each other. So in discovery learning, you give them the information and they connect that information with the existing knowledge base that an individual has, and then that learning process is complete, because then student discovers the knowledge themselves. So it is basically the discovery based learning. And the second one was meaningful verbal learning. In that case, there were certain sort of advanced organizers. Advanced organizers are sort of stages of different learning. If you need to learn a complete process, if you need to go through a complete process to learn something, then it would treat it as different stages of learning. In the first stage, for example, if you need to teach an individual the subject of human resource, then we would break it up into different advanced organizers, and that topic in the human resources, that subject in human resources, in order to teach that completely, you give the student or the learner an information. You give that information, and that student is able to connect it to the existing experiences and knowledge base that he already has. And then you move on to next level. But if the student has difficulty in understanding the next levels, you come back to the previous advanced organizer, and then you move on slowly. So that is basically meaningful verbal learning process. Then we also discuss the social learning theory. In terms of social learning theory, we discuss that basically the social learning theory is that individuals observe and imitate from the society or their role models or the behavior of the others to learn for themselves. So it had certain conditions that an individual should have. The individual should be attentive to observe the behavior, attentive to the pertinent clues that there are. The individual should be able to break up, codify those and store them for retention in the memory so that they stay in the memory. The individual should be able to go back and pull that back up from the memory, recreate those accurately. Then the individual should have enough motivation to you can say apply that new learned behavior. So that is how the social learning takes place. As I explained in the last lecture, it is very obvious in the young ones, it is very obvious in children. So when you see a kid, that kid actually has role models. They observe and imitate those role models. They observe their parents in the start, they observe their teachers in the school, they observe their professors and their friends and colleagues in schools and colleges and universities. They observe their bosses in the offices, they observe each and every individual that they face in their lives. But when you grow up, that thing actually becomes less obvious. But you are still, that social learning theory process is still going on, although there are many criticisms on it, because it also treats knowledge as an absolute. But the point is that the thing is that it actually takes place. It is less obvious when we get older, but it is more obvious when there are children, when we observe them as a children. Because as elder people, as adults, we have already established ourselves as the role models that we have observed all our lives. So now, another important aspect of this was that as kids, if you have a very good role model, then that kid would be happy, a competent role model, that kid would be happy and pleased. But if they have an incompetent role model, not very good role model, that kid would not be happy. They would be, for example, insecure. So in perspective of the social learning theory, we have observed in terms of experiential learning that when you go to a learning environment, as a student, when you go for internships, when you go for jobs, when you go for apprenticeships, when you a similar sort of social learning process is job shadowing, which we would discuss later on. Job shadowing is observing some professional actually doing the job. Social learning theory also says that when you're in a class, you might consider a teacher as a role model. Social learning theory, in perspective of social learning theory, you might also follow a friend as a role model. People also follow celebrities as a role model. So when you go for a job, actually in the office, you might see somebody who's doing that job very well, and you might follow that individual. You would observe, you would break up that observation, you would store that, you would retain it, you would be able to accurately produce it, and when necessary, if you are motivated enough, you would follow that behavior, you would use that learned knowledge. Then moving on to, I guess, lecture 4 and the fourth theory, social constructivism. So constructivism views learning as a process in which learners construct knowledge based on the previous experiences. As I said earlier, that past experiences is actually what makes us. Two same individuals, two identical twins, when put in different environment, they would be different people. Put in the same environment, they would be very similar. The issue is that if in different environment, they would have different experiences, and in similar environment, they would have almost similar experiences. So social constructivism or constructivism views learning as a process in which learners construct knowledge based on their past experiences, and past experiences actually make that individual construct knowledge from you can say the way he perceives that knowledge. Actually it grew out and in response to cognitivism and framed around metacognition. Now what is metacognition? Metacognition is basically learning about learning itself. Now let us see some definitions of metacognition. Metacognition refers to higher order thinking, when you can control the thinking process. That is metacognition. It refers to higher order thinking and involves active control over the cognitive process engaged in learning. When you have control over the learning process, when you can control your learning process, then that is metacognition. It is superior to cognition. So this theory, social constructivism, grew out of and in response to cognitivism. Then it would mean that cognition is discovery based learning, right? Cognition is using your intellectual capabilities, your problem solving skills to learn. But then this is above that. You control that learning process. The learner actually controls the learning process, what to learn and how to learn. That is metacognition. It involves active control over cognitive process, engage in learning, activities such as planning how to approach a given learning task. How to approach, it's not about how to approach a task, but how to approach a given learning task. If I want to learn something, how to learn that. That is part of a metacognition. Monitoring the comprehension and evaluating progress. Monitoring while you are learning and evaluating the progress toward the completion of task are all metacognitive in nature. That is the definition of metacognition. So again, social constructivism grew out of cognitivism. Now it is based on metacognition, because in metacognition the learner has the control over the learning process. Right? It is an advanced form of cognitivism. You can say that. You can say somehow that it is advanced form of cognitivism. It is metacognition. Metacognition is when an individual has a control over the learning process. He can choose, he can plan how to learn that thing. When he plans how to learn that, he can monitor the learning process. When he monitors if the learner can monitor the learning process, he can also evaluate the learning outcome. So that is metacognition. Simply put, metacognition is learning about learning itself. But more realistically, it is about knowing who you are as a learner and developing the capacity to leverage your strengths to your advantage while purposefully addressing your weaknesses. You need to see your own capabilities. You need to use your strengths and improve your weaknesses during the learning process. For there are many types of learners. We would come to that. When we would come to the theory of experiential learning, we would come to that. There is a Kolb's theory of experiential learning, which I would try to cover today in this lecture. If not, then maybe in the next one at least. It is necessary to complete it in the next one. I hope if, inshallah, we would cover that. So the point is that you need to know what type of a learner you are. Some people learn better from visual aid, for example. Some people learn better from listening. Some people learn better from practicing. Some people learn better from just observation. So you need to know what type of a learner you are. You see, we are associating the theories to make you evaluate what type of a learner you are. This is the aim of this course, the whole aim of this course. So if you need to observe yourself, if you need to monitor what type of a learner are you. And if you define that you are this and this type of a learner, if you can explain that, then you can use your strength to better learn. You need to observe the learning process. You need to mold the learning process in which you learn the best. You must have seen people who would like, if there is a mathematical problem in your exams, right? What I would do is, I would need to solve it down. I would need to solve it. Once I write something, it is easier for me to remember it. There would be people who need to read something without making any sound, read something, they would remember it. There are people who read something out loud, listening to their own voice, they learn something. There are people who would just listen to a lecture and never forget that. So there are people who need to be taught through examples. When we face a classroom, there are different types of students. When we give a concept, some of them grasp it immediately. Some of them ask you a question about the concept, and when you answer that question, a query, they remember that. But then there are others who need to see, they would ask us, sir, how would you explain that? Can you give an example? Can you give a real life example? Can you give a hypothetical example? They would remember that. Some of them would ask other queries related to it. Some of them would keep that information and associate to other things and thus ask something, how it is related to that. Then you give them answer to that and they would remember it. You see the difference? So there are people learn differently. So you need to know your strengths, and you need to use those strengths for your advantage, and you need to polish your weaknesses. You need to improve on your weaknesses. So knowledge is actively constructed. This is not passive learning, this is active learning. Because now it is a metacognitive process in which you control the learning process. You plan how to learn it, you monitor the learning process, and you evaluate that how has your planning worked. Have you learnt enough? Learning is a search for meaning by the learner. The learner, him or herself, searches for the meaning. Since he is planning, he is monitoring, and he is evaluating, he searches for the meaning. It is contextualized. Every individual sees information in their own context. I hope you understand the meaning of context. If I give you an information, you would see in your own context. I just give you an information, for example. I gave you information a few minutes ago. The learner takes up the control of the learning process, right? I gave you an example of, for example, I sometimes write to remember something. Some people say it out loud to remember something. Some people, for example, there were even times people would like tie a knot on their shirt or something, or a sleeve or something, to remember something. So the point is that information, each one of you who's watching this video right now have a different context of the information I just gave you. So learning is contextualized. There are individual characteristics based on the past experiences. That was the important point in it, because everybody has past experiences. So based on those past experiences, you would process that information differently, and you would create your own knowledge base, because you have different experiences to connect the current information to. It comes out of cognition. Metacognition comes out of cognition. You know yourself better. So you know where to connect this information so you can remember it. Do you get my point? I hope you do. And inherently social activity. Social constructivism is a social activity. The learning process is defined by the learner himself, and he observes, he learns from the social environment. And when a learner learns from the social environment, they learn by observation. They might learn by asking, they might learn by experiencing, whatever the mechanism is. It is an inherently social activity. Learning, the whole society learns together. Dialogic and recursive, that would mean that it is based on a dialogue. Because it is in social constructivism, you float an idea in the class, for example. If it is a classroom environment, you float an idea in the class. Now everybody would start debating. That would be sort of dialogic. People would dialogue over it. And those who accept those arguments, whatever, for example, knowledge they have acquired and gripped out of it, it is a recursive process. It is a recursive process. It reoccurs. Then it is the responsibility of the learner. When you see learning as an active learning rather than passive learning, then it is the responsibility of the learner. Passive learning is filling an empty vessel. Active learning is giving them the knowledge, a piece of information, and let them explore themselves, dig out the knowledge, discovery-based learning, for example. Now, social constructivism in the classroom would be, for example, journaling, writing journals, writing down the information, experiential activities. This course, for example, related to experiential activities. Experiential activities, you actually experience something. That would be learning through social constructivism. Then personal focus. Each student would, because it is contextualized, learning is a contextualized process, and it is an active learning process. So the information or the knowledge acquired depends on the student. So since they plan, they monitor, and they evaluate, that is why the student needs to have a personal focus. How I would learn, what I need to do to grasp that knowledge. Collaborative and cooperative learning, since it is a social, inherently a social learning mechanism, so it is bound to be collaborative and cooperative learning. So with collaboration and cooperative learning, the experience is different. It is not a teaching environment. It is not a teacher-centric environment. It is an environment where the student learns themselves. The responsibility is of the learner, and more you collaborate, more you cooperate with other learners, the more you learn. Then there are obviously critiques of social constructivism. Suggest that knowledge is neither given nor absolute. Social constructivism assumes that any part of knowledge is an individual's personal perception. There is no absolute knowledge about anything. It cannot be given to somebody. It cannot be taught to someone. It is how an individual perceives them, for it is contextualized. Social constructivism basically states that individual learn from the environment through basically the process of metacognition. It is responsibility of the learners. They learn from the society through whatever means they find suitable for themselves to learn from. Often seen as less rigorous than traditional approaches to instruction. It would be a very open sort of an environment. In a classroom, I would go and write a topic on the board and expect the students to be active learners and learn it themselves. Another critique. Does not fit well with traditional age grouping and rigid term semesters. This social constructivism mechanism it would not fit very well in a classroom environment, because there are different age groups in the classroom, because age grouping would mean in a sense that with age you go into different classes. Young students go up, and then again in the terms and semester system, it would be very difficult to incorporate that system, to let the student learn themselves. It would take much time, and it would need a heterogeneous group with different experiences to get together and learn various parts of the information. Social constructivism is somehow related to the experiential learning, but then you need to be a very active learner, and you need to understand yourself, your strengths, your weaknesses, to channel those strengths in the right direction, to plan the learning process, to evaluate the learning process, and to monitor the to plan the learning process, to evaluate the learning process, and to monitor your plan, monitor, and evaluate the outcome. Then comes another theoretical perspective, which is multiple intelligences. Multiple intelligences is basically, it grew out of constructivism, framed around metacognition again. These are sort of, you can say, more towards technical side. The next two theories are basically towards a little more advanced versions of the theoretical frameworks that are required for the learning mechanisms. All people are born with eighth intelligence, presented by Gardner in 1983. It is again framed on metacognition, and we were talking about that individual is an active learner, right? He has certain strengths, and he knows his weaknesses, and he plans the learning process, he monitors the learning process, and he evaluates the outcome, right? So this theory states about the strengths and weaknesses that each individual is born with the 8 intelligences: the verbal linguistic, the visual spatial, the logical mathematical, the kinesthetic, the musical intelligence, naturalist intelligence, interpersonal intelligence, and intrapersonal intelligence. And all these intelligences, whatever the student has the most strength in, for example, he can use those strengths to, for example, use that for the learning process, and they target and develop their weaknesses. I would explain these in the next slide. Kinesthetic would be body smart, linguistic would be word smart, logical would be number smart, logical mathematical would be number smart, and naturalistic, going on the other side, naturalistic would be nature smart, visual spatial would be picture smart, musical would be music smart, and intrapersonal means myself smart, I know about myself, and interpersonal would be people smart. So each individual is born with these characteristics. It depends on the individual, which, for example, as we said, that there are people who are word smart. There are people who are body smart, there are people who are number smart. We were discussing that people remember in different ways. Some people would speak and learn. Some people would write and learn. Some people would even, we used to have some sort of poems. When we needed to, I can't remember any of those, but sort of poems, sort of a statement, a very funny sort of a statement, which would let us remember a whole concept. If you want to remember the definition, remember this. They still do exist among students. So the point is that they are there to remember, for us to remember. So that is a metacognitive process. If somebody knows that this is the way I learn better, they would use that. This is my strength. Picture smart is my strength, for example. So I would visually remember, try to visually remember. When I read something, I would imagine that happening and I would remember that. If somebody is, for example, you can say word smart, they would associate them in their mind with different words. Somebody would be number smart. They would associate themselves, those things, with various numbers. Somebody would be, for example, music smart. They can make poems out of that stuff and then remember it. So you can, in this process, you can have your own strengths, and then using those strengths, you need to know what type of a learner are you. You need to know what type of memory, what type of a strength you have, so that you can keep that thing in your knowledge, in your memory, and create a knowledge out of it. What are those symbols that are required to be connected with this new piece of information, so that this new piece of information can stay in my mind? All those theories can be related, you know. The main blank slate thing by John Locke, then cognition thing, that you connect, social learning theory, that you observe and then you connect, discover and connect, observe and connect, and now what to connect with, that is constructivism, metacognition. And multiple intelligence is again related to metacognition, what to connect with, how to remember that. Delivery of instruction via multiple mediums, student-centered classroom, not teacher-centered classroom, student-centered classroom, authentic assessment based on each one's capabilities, self-directed learning, individual would be in control. In metacognition, you would consider every individual to be an active learner, and they would be responsibility to learn rests on the learner, him or herself. So in this case, in multiple intelligence in the classroom, delivery of instruction via multiple mediums is for everybody to understand that. Student-centered classroom, not the teacher-centered, I repeat that. Authentic assessment, because Einstein once said that if you judge the capability of fish, if you judge a fish by its capability of climbing a tree, right, something like that, that would be wrong. In other words, that was like not exact his statement, but a summary of what he wanted to say, that everybody has their own characteristics. You cannot judge a fish by its capability of climbing a tree. So if everybody has these several intelligences, and each one of them have different strengths in these, everybody might have music intelligence, everybody might be music smart, but some people would be more music smart than other people. So everybody has different capabilities to learn. So if they have different capabilities to learn, then if they are assessed based on the use of those capabilities which are their strengths, then that would be authentic assessment. Yes, the exact statement was, you cannot judge a fish by its ability to climb trees, something like that. Again, I'm doubtful again, sorry. So it is self-directed learning, it is a student-centric environment. There are criticisms. Lack of quantifiable evidence that MI, multiple intelligences, exist, that everybody has those capabilities. Lack of evidence that use of MI as a curricular and methodological approach has any discernible impact on learning. Suggestive of a departure from core curricula and standards. First of all, the most important criticism that is not mentioned in these slides, it would be very difficult to use different mediums for a single topic. For example, if I need to explain consumer behavior, it would be difficult to use all those different mechanisms to hit everybody with their relevant strength, right? Secondly, if it is student centric, so at a very core level, it can be at advanced level that you make it a research based course, but at a very core level, it would be departure from the core curriculum and the existing standards of grading and assessment and teaching mechanism. Then lack of evidence that multiple intelligences, if it is used as a methodology, it would improve the results. Then that is because it has not been, I guess, up to my knowledge, it has not been experimented up till now. Might have been experimented, but not in as a regular curriculum. Lack of quantifiable evidence, even that multiple intelligence do exist in each and every individual. And secondly, it would be very difficult to quantify individual in a classroom, that which one is kinesthetic or which one is body smart, which one is picture smart, which one is, for example, so all that stuff. So it is very difficult to quantify all that. So then the last one is brain-based learning, another a further technical side from maybe originating from neurological perspective. Yes, it grew out of neuroscience and constructivism. It has by Souza, Kane and Jensen. In 1980s, they presented 12 governing principles. Brain is a parallel processor. It can process information, parallel, two different sets of information. Parallel process would mean it can process multiple information, not just a single piece. You can give them multiple information to process. Whole body learning, it is not just the mind that is absorbing information or that, but it is a whole body process. The learning process is a complete process. Then a search for meaning by the learner, metacognition, again it grew out of constructivism related to metacognition, then it is also related to metacognition, a search for the meaning that the learner should be active learner. Patterning would mean that people would see patterns in the new information that might be related to their existing experiences that they have. Processing of parts and wholes. Would mean that processing the complete information or processing the information in parts also. Oh, sorry, I missed one, that emotions are critical. How individual would be able to relate that information to his previous experiences and emotions. Focused attention and peripheral perception. That focused attention would mean that if there is a bullseye, focused attention would be exactly on that target, and peripheral would be surrounding that area. That is also possible. Conscious and unconscious processes, both are actually learning consistently. Conscious processes are focused on what you know actually they are doing, but unconscious processes are doing other things as well continuously. So individual learns from both of them. There are several types of memory, not just a single one. Short-term memory, long-term memory, whatever, many types. Embedded learning sticks. Embedded learning would mean that learning that has been embedded in the mind, actually it sticks. The learning that has been, in other words, you can say, relating it to cognition process, when it is connected to the symbols, when it is embedded in the system, it sticks there, it stays over there. Then challenge and threat, that is perceived by challenge and threat whenever you need to learn something. When you have a challenge or when you have a threat, then the learning process, actually the mind works faster in those times. And every brain is unique, the 12 governing principle. So every mind is different from the other minds. So these are basically the 12 governing principles of brain-based learning. Brain-based learning in the classroom, opportunities for group learning, regular environmental changes, a multi-sensory environment because of parallel processing, opportunities for self-expression and making personal connections to the content, because every brain is different, so everybody has different experiences. Once they have different experiences, they make different connections. For the same information, they might connect it to different memories of them, different emotions of theirs, different knowledge of theirs that exist in their mind already, different experiences that they have over the lifetime. Community-based learning would be the whole community learns from the process. The whole community learns. Critiques of brain-based learning. Research is conducted basically in neuroscientists, not teachers and educational researchers. one thing. Lack of understanding of brain itself makes brain-based learning questionable, because neuroscientists are still researching on the brain itself. So this is a very interesting argument that I have a critique on brain-based learning theory, because we don't know about the brain itself completely yet, so how can we say something about the brain-based learning? A very interesting one. Then individual principles have been scientifically questioned. All these governing principles have been scientifically questioned across one time or another, so it is very difficult to follow those 12 governing principles as uniquely for as a guiding principle. Then other learning theories to note: andragogy by Knowles, flow by Csikszentmihalyi, situated learning by Lev, conditions of learning by Gange. But the point is, conditions of learning by Gagne. But the point is that there are so many other theories also. And since we said in the start that learning is itself, how people learn is a difficult thing to say, and there are so many theories that how people learn, it is very difficult to give a one concrete answer. But the main theories, the 6 main theories that we have discussed, give us some foundations of the learning process. And what is learning? Learning is something through which the behavior changes, through which ability to perform changes, either permanent or potential ability to perform or potential behavior changes. Learning is the process through which individual acquires knowledge and changes his behavior. That is learning. So how do people learn? They learn from their environment. They learn from their experience. They learn from the environmental stimuli. All these theories agree that people learn from the environment. All these theories agree that people learn from a stimulus from the environment. They learn from the observation. Any event taking place is a stimulus. So if they learn from the stimulus or they learn from the environment, then in that case, all of these theories at least have certain common foundations. They have certain common foundation. Some of these theories treat individuals as passive individuals. Some of these theories treat individuals as active learners, who take part in that, who have cognitive ability, who have intellectual capability, who have the ability to solve problems, who have ability to question, who have ability to discover knowledge themselves. But then as we would move on, we would also see that learners are also different. Not one box does not fit everybody. So you cannot say that one size fits all. So learners are also different from each other. Humanists would say all students are intellectually motivated to self-actualize or learn. Basically, humanists is a theoretical foundation which treats human beings as intellectual and rational individuals who make optimal choices and decisions. So humanists would argue that all students are intrinsically motivated to self-actualize or learn, because learning is dependent upon meeting a hierarchy of needs. If it is a physiological, psychological and intellectual level that you achieve, it is based on a hierarchy of need. And if it is based on hierarchy of need, if it is a need, then you need to be over there. If you have a need to be over there, then all the students, all the learners are active learners. They are intrinsically motivated. Not active learners, it can be based on passive learning also, but they are motivated to learn. Even a passive learner has to be motivated to learn. So since learning is dependent upon meeting a hierarchy of need, the physiological and sociological level that you achieve. So if it is a need to achieve that level, then you are motivated. So humanists would assume that all students are intellectually motivated to self-actualize or learn. It's their responsibility to learn. They would be very motivated to acquire more knowledge through their experiences. Learning should be reinforced. It should be reinforced on the individuals. An individual should reinforce the learning process. Now there are formal and now moving on, now going out of the theories. going out of the learning theories and going into the experiential learning theory. We would discuss one main theory of experiential learning because we do not have enough time to, for example, cover all the aspects that are possible in the learning environment. All the theories that are available, that have been that have tried to explain that how people learn. We have given a brief, you can say, overview of all the learning theories, and every student should be able to comprehend by now that how those theories are associated to their learning environment. They should be able to identify themselves as some type of a learner. We would come to that again in experiential learning, but every individual is certain type of a learner. Every individual, if they are active learners, they would be questioning and problem solving. They should be able to use those cognitive abilities to identify hypothesis, to solve the problem, to collect data from the environment and process and either prove or disprove those hypotheses, and in that process they acquire certain knowledge. So at least we are clear about that right now. So there are formal and informal settings of learning. Formal settings are schools, colleges, universities, on-the-job training and off-the-job training. All these are formal settings of learning. There are also informal settings of learning. For example, social settings. There are friends and families and social networks and peer groups. All these are informal settings. As we said in the start about in the few definitions that we learn from every experience. It is not just the bookish knowledge that these theories talk about. It is not just the bookish knowledge. I'm not talking about the bookish knowledge only. Knowledge and learning is a lifelong process. We said that we start learning from the fetus to the point we breathe the last breath. Learning continues. So if we are getting knowledge consistently at each and every moment of our lives, so that means that is a learning process. We are only questioning how we learn. Not just focused on, when we discuss the learning theories, we were not just focused on how we learn in the classroom, how we learn as a whole. So when we learn from the complete environment, then our social setup, our peer groups, our friends and family, everything comes into that. I hope you remember when I gave you the example of role models. Role model can be anybody. In the social learning theory, I hope you remember, there were role models. And if there are role models, then automatically it would mean that you can say that those role models can be any segment of your life. Then there are other informal situations. You going on a road, for example, I give you the example of a traffic accident. You meeting certain individual, you going to the office and talking to your boss. Those are all informal settings. Those are not the created learning environment. So everything outside the created learning environment is an informal situation. And workplace, again, as I said, that you walking to the boss and you talking to your colleagues and everything. Other than the formal setting in which training and learning is being imparted is the informal setting. You at your home, you at your workplace, you with your friends, you on the internet, the time you spend is the learning process. Every day you learn a different piece of knowledge. You gain a different piece of knowledge. So what? Why is an understanding of learning theory important for educators and students? Now that is the question. And I have been answering this question in all of my lectures, in every discussion that I have had. Why is it important in understanding of, why the understanding of learning theory is very important for learners and for the educators, both of them, for the teachers and for the students, for the internees and for the organizations that are giving them internship, for a job trainee, for an apprenticeship, for job shadowing, whatever the environment is. When there is a learner and there is an educator, when there are two, the relationship between these two, then it is important to understand the learning theory. Because learning theory told us so many things. Behaviorism told us that people learn in terms of classical conditioning and in terms of operant conditioning. Then there was cognitivism. Cognitivism said that people have intellectual capabilities, they have problem solving skills, they solve those problems. Then there was social learning theory. It said that people learn from observation. Then there was constructivism. Constructivism banked on metacognition. Multiple intelligences banked on metacognition. Then there is brain-based learning, a totally scientific sort of, governed by 12 principles. But the point is that each one of us should know that how people learn. We should have certain theoretical foundations. That is why when students fail in the class, we punish them with bad grades, because that is how they learn. That is how we assume they learn. If that perspective changes, for example, sometimes in my class, I would say that today attendance is not mandatory. Whoever wants to leave the class, just leave. But if you stay over here, you learn the concept, what I'm trying to express. So what does that mean? I'm not punishing them. I'm removing a negative reinforcement, for example, the mandatoriness of attendance. Right? So in other words, what I'm trying to do over here is that I'm considering learning as a participatory process. I redefine the rules. So it is very important for me to understand how they would learn as an educator. And similarly, it is important for the student to understand how they would learn. They need to control the learning process. They need to make a plan for the learning process. They need to monitor it. They need to evaluate it. Then comes the epistemology, our beliefs about the knowledge. Epistemology is the theory of knowledge. What is knowledge itself? So our beliefs about the nature of knowledge, in other words, our epistemology, profoundly influences our approach to education, whether being a learner or whether being an instructor or an educator. If knowledge is independent of the learner, then it is realism. Student is an empty vessel and we teach them. We tell them whatever, the vessel is filled and we let them go. We test them, okay, the knowledge is there and we let them go. Then there is knowledge in the mind constructed by the learner. Cognitivism, metacognitivism, all that. It is in the mind, they have certain experiences and certain knowledge. And if new information is provided, they make connections. Then it is an active learning process. So it is the theory of knowledge. If our beliefs about these theories takes us in different directions. I hope you understand this point. That is why it is important to highlight, important to understand our theories, important to understand the way you learn and the way you would learn, for me to understand, for you to understand. Right? Psychology of learning. Our beliefs about how people learn, our psychology of learning, profoundly influences our approach to education or our approach to the learning process. This is for both of us. This is for both of us, that our psychology of learning, if my beliefs that how you learn is important for me and your belief that how you would learn is important for you. So learning is an incremental adding to tabula rasa on one side. It is a blank slate and we write on it. And on the other side, learning is constructing meaning. You are a cognitive individual. You can evaluate your learning process. Now, all three of these things need to align. Our beliefs about knowledge, our beliefs about learning, and our strategies for practice. All these matter. First of all, what is knowledge? Whether knowledge is inside a student that we bring out, whether knowledge is from the empiricism, Aristotle's view, Plato's view. From Plato's perspective, it is inside and we can take it out with debate. Aristotle's perspective, it is in the outside environment and you learn through empiricism, observation, data collection. Right? That is the belief where the knowledge is. Is it, do I have to dig it out of the student, or do I have to impart the knowledge through, if it is to be dug out of the student, or if the student is an empty vessel, I need to put the knowledge in there. And if the knowledge is already existing in him, I need to take it out. Our belief about the existence of knowledge, that where the knowledge is located, is important. And it should be aligned with my belief with learning, that what the learning process would be. What is learning then? Is learning a guided thing? Is learning a supportive thing? Would I direct the individual that this is how you need to learn and what you need to learn? Or is it a supportive process that you need to learn this and I suggest this? And you explore and you are becoming an active learner. You discover the learning. So discover the knowledge, in other words. Discovery learning, something like that. You discover the knowledge yourself. Then our strategies for practice. Once we identify, once we align our belief about the knowledge, that where knowledge exists, we have beliefs about, and we have aligned it with the belief of the learning, then we need to align it with the strategy to practice. How the students would learn best. Would they learn with internships? Would they learn with on-the-job training? Would they learn with the experiential learning? Would they learn by just giving them examples? Would they learn by the case studies? Would they learn by simulation-based learning? And how, if that is the learning process, if we agree that it is the experiences that from the outside environment the student processes, and then if knowledge is, let me give you an example to clarify that. If I specifically assume that knowledge is from the outside environment, and the student collects that information and connects it with his existing experience and discovers the learning, discovers the knowledge himself. If that is my belief, then what strategies can I use which is in line with that belief? I can use, for example, internship-based learning. I can ask the students to apply the knowledge, the theoretical knowledge, to apply it. That would be experiential learning. I can, I can use, for example, consultancy project-based learning. Go and apply the knowledge in an industry. They have a problem and you go and solve that problem using all the theoretical knowledge that you have. Experiential learning. And I work-based learning or apprenticeship-based learning. So all those strategies need to be aligned with my belief about knowledge, where knowledge is, and my belief about the learning process. This is how they would learn better. Now this is an interesting slide. Now what would a classroom look like as viewed through the lens of Plato, Aristotle, Locke, and or from those perspective of behaviorism, constructivism, social constructivism and cognitive. This is just an image that this is what a classroom would look like, where the students would be with caps on their heads, and a professor is putting books in a machine and the other student is grinding it, and those grinding material is being transferred to the students' head. This is what learning look like from the eyes of everybody. Just an interesting image to make things lighter. I guess it is about time that we start to summarize this lecture. We have almost touched the end of our theoretical understanding of the learning process, and in the last lecture we would move on to experiential learning, which is the most important aspect, and then we would immediately link to the experiential learning to the work-based learning environment. So we have covered a lot today. For example, we maybe it would be useful to go through all the slides from the start just once to cover the three main theories that we covered today. We started with constructivism, which views learning as a process in which the learners construct knowledge based on their past experiences. We considered over here learners as active learners, and they have certain past experiences, and through those past experiences they would learn from the environment. And we specifically brought in the concept of metacognition. Metacognition is when an individual controls the learning process. They have the ability to learn about the learning process. They have the ability to design the learning process, plan about if they want to learn something, they would plan how they would learn it. They would monitor the learning process, and they would evaluate the learning outcome later on. So knowledge is actively constructed, it is contextualized, it is inherently social activity, it is dialogic and recursive, and a search for meaning by the learner, and it is the responsibility, the most of all, it is the responsibility of the learner. I hope we discussed all of these in detail. So in classroom environment, it would be experiential learning, would be constructivism view, journaling, personal focus, collaborative and cooperative. So if learning is a metacognitive process and everybody has their experiences, and they process the new information while connecting those existing dots, they would process the new information and connect it with his existing experience, and in that way every learner would see it from a different context. You see, so it is the learner-based environment, a learner-centric environment. But the problem is that it suggests that knowledge is neither given or absolute. There is no limits. There are no limits in real sense, but then you would have to give some concrete information for the learning process. You cannot let it go. Plus, it is seem very open as compared to the traditional approach to the tutoring process, which is lecturer-centric or teacher-centric environment. So it does not fit well with traditional age groupings in the school and the rigid terms and semesters. If it is an open environment, if you leave it to the students, then not everybody would be motivated in a similar manner. Then the concept of multiple intelligences, this theory posed that there are 8 intelligences inside an individual from the date of birth. Being kinesthetic would mean being body smart, linguistic would mean word smart, logical would mean being number smart, interpersonal people smart, intrapersonal being smart about myself, musical would smart about the music, visual means picture smart, and naturalistic means nature smart. So all these capabilities are inside an individual. So again, going back, that multiple intelligence is also based on metacognition. An individual knows his strengths and he knows his weaknesses. Then he can channel the learning process using his strengths. His strength might be being word smart or number smart or picture smart. And over here we actually discussed the concept that some people read out loud to remember stuff. Some people write down to remember stuff. Some people would create an image inside their minds to remember stuff. Some people might make poetic phrases to remember stuff. So, or some people would even might make funny phrases to remember stuff. So the point is that they know their strengths. They can, on the way of the learning process, they can polish their weaknesses, and they can also improve the learning process by knowing and utilizing their strengths the most. So the critiques were that it is less quantifiable. Number one, it has lack of evidence that it would improve the learning outcome, and it is a departure from the core curricula. And most of all, as I expressed a criticism over here, which is not mentioned in the slides, that it would be very difficult to guide a classroom in so many different ways for one single topic. It would be very difficult to let everybody give environmental stimuli to specific students based on their specific strengths. But you can try your best in any case. Brain-based learning is basically dependent on 12 governing principles, which were brain is a parallel processor, whole body is learning, a search for the meaning, patterning means making patterns. I would explain only the difficult ones, but otherwise are very clear. Patterning would mean individuals see similar patterns and they utilize those similar patterns to store the information. Emotions are critical in this case. Some information is associated to certain emotions, and that would be very important for learning process. Processing of parts and whole would mean either process part of the information or the complete information. Mind has the capability to do that. Focused attention and peripheral perception would mean that attention is actually focused on the bullseye, and perception is like that surrounding area. It is peripheral around that environment. Conscious and unconscious processes are existing in the learning. There are several types of memories. Embedded learning sticks would mean that the learning embedded in the system, in your minds, actually sticks over there for good. People learn better in cases of challenges and threats because their learning capability increases. And in some people actually, because the last statement is every brain is unique. That would mean that not every brain would be learning through all these. Some people might not be able to process parallel information. Some people might not be able to learn better under pressure, like challenge and a threat. And some people would perform much better under these circumstances. Now, brain-based learning in the classroom would mean that there are opportunities for group learning, regular class, environmental changes can stimulate learning process, opportunities for self-expression and making personal connections to the contact. Again, because you have your own strengths, because you have your own guiding principles, then you would be making connections based on your past experiences. Then again, it is the research conducted by neuroscientists. It is based on brain rather than the actual classroom environment. Research not conducted by teachers, school institutions or universities or educational researchers. And since the complete knowledge of brain is itself not yet complete, the knowledge of brain itself is not yet complete, then this theoretical foundation can be questioned. There is a list of other theories. Then there are formal and informal settings in which learning takes place. When at this stage we came out of the theories of learning, and we said that there are formal settings like schools, colleges, universities, on-the-job training, off-the-job training, and informal settings like you learn from the society and your social relationships, your family, your friends, your social groups and your peer groups. And there are informal situations also, and like workplace outside the environment, and then there is a workplace environment where you go for a job. Apart from the classroom environment, a proper training environment, everything else would be learning settings, informal setting of learning environment. Why is it understanding of learning theory is important for teaching and student? We discussed that in detail in every lecture and in this lecture as well. Once we know the learning process, because it is important, because we need to know our beliefs about the knowledge, whether knowledge is outside, whether knowledge is inside. Then we need to know about the learning process, our beliefs about the learning, how people learn, whether people make connections, whether environmental stimuli like punishment or reward make them learn, whether it is people are very intellectual and they are problem solving and they discover the knowledge. How do people learn? Then our strategy for practice, once those two are aligned, our belief about knowledge and our learning process is aligned to about the belief, whether knowledge is inside or outside, then that knowledge we need to create an environment in which all those are aligned with each other, so that the learning process takes place. And I gave an example for this. And in the end, I concluded this presentation at this point, where funny image was given to see that how students learn, how the theories about learning, how the theorists of learning would see a classroom like. Hope to see you again in the last lecture, and thank you very much for your patience with me. Allah Hafiz.